And for those who are joining us after the fact, hello and thank you for participating asynchronously. And let us pray as we move into Matthew 21 today. Let us hear this prayer from the beginning of Holy Week, from Palm Sunday. Jesus, when you rode into Jerusalem, the people waved palms with shouts of acclamation. Grant that when the shouting dies, we may still walk beside you, even to a cross, for the glory of your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. We did sort of
pray.
I
said those Kiwis know how to pray.
They sure do. I love the New Zealand prayer book. We did a preview of coming attractions last Wednesday when we just dipped our toe into Matthew 21, and we'll read that in a second. But I just wanted to remind us before we do that, all through Matthew, Jesus has been predicting this week, this moment, even though people may or may not have really understood. And so I'll just very quickly read these passion predictions that brought us to this point. So first from Matthew 16, from that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed on the third day, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. And of course, that's at Caesarea Philippi, right after Jesus asks, who do people say that I am? And then who do you say that I am? And Peter gets the answer right and is given the keys to the kingdom and blah, blah, blah.
But then he doesn't get the story.
Exactly. And then the next chapter, Matthew 17, as they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised. And they were greatly distressed. And then finally, Matthew 20, we just read this. While Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside by themselves and said to them on the way, look, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death. Then they will hand him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. And on the third day, he will be raised. So again, this is, the groundwork has been laid throughout Matthew. And then, apologies. I don't know what that is. I don't want that. So my question for you all before we go back to read the text is why Jerusalem? What is significant about Jerusalem?
The head of the Jewish faith is centered at Jerusalem.
Beautiful. And what specifically is located in Jerusalem?
The temple, their temple.
The temple. Hey, Kim.
Morning, everybody.
Glad you can join us.
Thank you. Sorry.
It's okay. Anything else about Jerusalem? So it's the center, the center of the Jewish faith. The temple is located. What's significant about the temple?
Where God is.
Yes.
What isn't?
And what isn't? Yeah. Where God is. Yes. The temple is understood to be where God resides. Built by Solomon. Remember, David is not allowed to build a temple, a home for God. His son Solomon builds the temple. So the temple is the center of everything, right? It's the navel.
God is everywhere.
But in Judaism, the temple is understood as where God resides, right? Very specifically. What else is in Jerusalem?
Hmm. Is the government there? Are
Yeah.
the authorities or
Yeah.
the?
And which government?
The Roman government.
The
Yeah,
Roman government.
yeah.
The Roman government was mainly based, I forget, whatever the town was by the sea.
Well, yeah,
Caesarea.
And
Caesarea.
I believe that they only came up to Jerusalem, on the high holy days to prevent, to try and show the flag and keep them from rioting.
well, yes. And there's Herod's palace, and there's definitely a presence there. You're right. The main provincial government is located elsewhere. So I want to be very clear about that. And Jerusalem has a Roman presence. And so that's my point, is that you've got,
Jerusalem does have a Roman presence, but Herod is, as an empire, they kind of let the Jews rule themselves for as long as they didn't get too far out of line.
right. But I think my point in all of this is to make sure that we understand that he's coming into a city that is not only the locus of Judaism, right? The center of Judaism. That he is also coming into a place where the Roman authority is going to be based. So that's all I'm saying, or is going to be present. So, all right, now let's take a look. And we read this section last week, but let's reread it. Let's read 21, 1 through 10. And would somebody be willing to read this for us?
Sure, 23,
21.
21.
21, 1
yeah.
through 10.
Yep. Thank you, Fred.
Okay. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there, with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. Say to daughter Zion, "See, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven!" When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, "Who is this?" The crowds answered, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee."
Thank you, Fred. All right, a familiar story, obviously. What do you notice? What strikes you, perhaps in a new way, or where do you want to start? Any of those questions will do.
Well, they're very specific about the donkey and the colt, or, I don't know what the significance of it is, but
So this comes from the prophet Zechariah. And so remember, the prophet's job is to do what?
predict.
No, God speaks through the prophet.
Yeah.
God
And
speaks.
specifically to do what? Why is
To
God
correct
speaking?
their ways.
What's that, Ellie?
I thought they were supposed to foretell.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
We usually call the people back from their wicked ways.
Exactly. Thank you, John. And I think, Ellie, that's what you were saying too. I couldn't quite hear you. Exactly. And so the whole point is that when the people have gone astray, the prophets are the mouthpieces, right? The messengers of God. And we, in our context, tend to think of prophets as, almost with a crystal ball, right? Or reading the tea leaves and saying, "Oh, this is going to happen." It's less. There is any prediction, it's couched in terms of this is what will happen if you don't, straighten up and fly right. And so this prediction from Zechariah is about the coming king, the coming ruler, king who is going to vanquish the enemies of Israel. Hey, Marietta, I'm so glad you joined us.
I thought, yeah,
Yay. Delighted that you're here. So this prophecy here comes from Zechariah. So, it's a messianic prophecy. And when I say that, what do I mean?
Coming of the Messiah.
Okay, so what's the Messiah?
King of the Jews. The leader of the Jews.
Okay, what kind?
And as Zechariah said, he will,
Whoops, I think we got a couple people talking at once. I'm sorry. What was that?
Isn't that
Hang on. I think my Wi-Fi is wonky. Hang on one second. Let me switch networks.
No, I mean, we could hear that. I can't hear Patty.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
yes.
yes.
You're a little broken, but good.
John, what were you saying? I'm sorry. It all kind of jumbled up for me.
Well, I was just saying the part of Zechariah that we were reading said that's going to, whoever he's going to come on the colt, but he's going to rule over everything and he will bring peace from sea to sea. So it's sort of this almost the coming of the kingdom.
Beautiful.
But
Oh.
sorry, go ahead, Donna.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say that Amy Jill Levine says that, talks about the location and says that Bethphage cannot be identified, but the Mount of Olives east of Jerusalem was linked to messianic and eschatological ideas.
Excellent. And what does eschatological mean?
The end times.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and that ties in with what John was saying about the coming of the kingdom. Now, Ellie, you're going to say something. Everyone was talking. Everyone was so excited. Ellie, what were you going to say?
Well, my thought was that so often we run into the situation where people think that the Messiah is an earthly ruler and is going to open whoop-ass on the Romans, and everybody's going to be Jewish forever, and it will be peaceful because of the mightiness of this great king. And they completely missed Jesus's point. But what Jesus is telling them is something that has been incomprehensible, just has never occurred to anybody.
Beautiful. Excellent.
The open Yale courses make the point that the early Christians debated the nature of Jesus. And in fact, later Christians debated it too. But one of the central issues was Jesus the Messiah?
Mm-hmm.
If he was the Messiah, then was he the Son of God? And if he was the Son of God, was he then co-equal with God? These were questions, that people, the Bible seems to have, gone with the winning, but these were questions that were debated from the onset that weren't really settled by divine revelation, or it was a political settlement.
And remember, and you've talked about this before too, Fred, that the closing the canon of the Bible, right, is also a very political process. And so which gospels make it, which don't, which epistles make it, which don't. So there's always an agenda there, no question. But looking at the text as received in Matthew, so we get this imagery of the colt and the prophecy from Zechariah. John, anything from the parallels that sheds light?
Well, it's interesting in the parallels because Matthew, in order to make the Zechariah prophecy, has got to have a donkey and a colt.
Mhm.
And somehow he's got to ride on both of them.
I was wondering
If
about
you
that.
go to Mark and Luke, they only say there's a colt, and they're very precise that it's a colt that no one has ever ridden upon before. And there's no mention of the donkey or the mother or whatever. So obviously Matthew was trying to fit the prophecy before, and the other ones, I don't know whether there's almost something like the virgin birth or whatever in terms of the colt never having been sat upon.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think that that is, and I don't remember specifically, but that rings a bell in terms of, you know, the honor of it being this pure, never ridden, you know, not broken colt. Excellent.
Has,
Oh,
has
go ahead.
a little bit of a flavor of, Mary being a virgin.
Yeah, that's what John was saying. Yep, exactly. Exactly. And so we get this idea, and that's where the parallels are so helpful, that Matthew's trying to shoehorn this in, right? So that the prophecy fits neatly and gets tied up with a bow. So, it's always important to remember that that's what's going on. That's part of what's going on. So exclusively what's going on, but that's part of it. Anything else that you notice maybe in a different way than you have before? Because you've heard this story presumably for a long time. Every 3 years in church we read Matthew's version, so it's not unfamiliar, but sometimes we hear things fresh. Is there anything that strikes you?
I've never quite understood why people were spreading their cloaks on the road, except for possibly just to keep the dust from rising and dirtying. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And if they didn't have a cloak, they got a cut a branch.
Any ideas about that? Anybody?
The, at this point in time, Pilate was making his approach from the opposite side of Jerusalem. So, and he would be arriving with all the show and force of the Roman Empire behind him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a deliberate contrast there,
Mm-hmm.
but
As
they
we-
also want to show that Jesus is arriving in triumph.
Beautiful. And as we often say, if we were to see this staged, right? You could imagine, Jesus approaching from one direction and Pilate from the other, and you might hear the music rising, and that climactic moment if this were on film or on stage. What do you think?
Actually, Luke adds a little bit of a gloss in saying that after they spread the garments, he's drawn near the descent of the Mount of Olives, and everybody starts Hosanna. So it's more the Mount of Olives. He's coming down from it, and along with the end times, and makes it very dramatic in that respect.
Beautiful.
I learned a funny factoid, which just like during the Iraq War or something, that this culture, the ground and shoes and feet were the dirtiest possible imaginable thing. And so therefore, if they're trying to cover the ground, are they trying to keep Jesus's feet off the dirt? I mean, you remember people hitting Saddam Hussein's statue with shoes?
Yep.
And this is, what is, no, it's because shoes are filthy.
Yep.
This would be the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Trying to, as you say, trying to protect Jesus.
Yeah, pushing them. Yeah.
Think about that. It really adds something to the Maundy Thursday gospel, right? From John, of Jesus washing his disciples.
Washing the feet, yeah.
That really brings that out.
Mhm.
And, elsewhere when Jesus tells the disciples, if people won't listen to you, shake the dust off your feet and move on. And so beautiful. And so, I think holding that up, that separation between Jesus's feet and the dirt of the ground, I think it's just worth keeping that in mind as we go through this. That's really helpful, Ellie. Thank you. I wanted to linger for a second on verse 10. When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the city was in turmoil. And I don't know if you remember another time in Matthew's gospel when all of Jerusalem was up in arms and in turmoil, even though that word isn't necessarily used. Is there another, and go way back? I mean, we're talking the better part of a year ago when we started this study, but do you remember anybody?
Was it with the decapitation of John the Baptist?
Oh, well, that's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought about that one, Elin, but I would imagine that there was there's probably a lot of turmoil
Paramount.
about that as well.
Oh, that wasn't the one you were thinking of. Okay.
Yeah, but that's a wonderful example.
Mm.
The one that I was thinking about is in Matthew. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who's been born to the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. So we have this whole from the very beginning, when Matthew sets up Herod versus the child Jesus, and all of Jerusalem is frightened, and you can imagine sort of the chaos that would engender. And then here we are bookending it with Jesus coming into Jerusalem, being lauded as King of the Jews, the very thing Herod was terrified of, right? And the whole city is in turmoil. Who is this? The crowds were saying.
I have a question. These adoring crowds, who are these people? Are they Jews? Are they Gentiles? Or how do they know what's their previous exposure to Jesus that they hail him as the new David or whatever?
Great question. What do
Son
you
of
all
David, yes.
What do you all think?
Mm,
He is?
One of the troubling things has been that there is no independent record, of Jesus entering, of of even his crucifixion,
Mm-hmm.
which would make you think that it's, wasn't perhaps as big a deal as the biblical writers made it out to be.
Well,
But
just
it was for
the
the Jewish people.
Well, that's just it. The Jewish, even the contemporary Jewish records don't really record this as being, as even happening. It didn't make above the fold.
Mhm.
For those of us who are old enough to remember newspapers.
Well, it did make it into all three of the canonical gospels.
the canonical gospels were all written by Christians. So, but yeah, I mean, the Romans wouldn't have kept a record
No.
of
The
the
Romans kept
crucifixion.
very
They
good
just throw them up
records.
there with robbers. The Romans kept great records, but they wouldn't have noted a third person who happened to get crucified that Friday. So it's not surprising that there is no contemporary record, but it's a real pity.
In terms of the crowds, Luke says they are the disciples,
Mm-hmm.
the whole multitude of the disciples.
The followers.
So I suppose those are the people who've been gathering around him as he came towards Jerusalem and were following him.
And they would all have been drumming up, drumming up excitement in Jerusalem. I mean, not just the two getting the colt, but by this time he's got so many followers and the word is spread so widely that you've got a lot of people who'd be curious as to who that is.
If you were writing this kind of as a modern novel, you might say that, I mean, when you look at Jesus's crucifixion and then supposedly the temple, whatever was rent, and the horrible weather events and so forth, then it would probably have been scary to the Romans, and they might have just said, well, let's not put this one in the record. Let's just totally get rid of it. Let's expunge it from the
Yeah.
records.
Yeah.
It's too scary.
Really important point, Donna. And going back to that point about the whole city being in turmoil, what does Rome want most of all?
Peace.
Peace.
Quiet.
Order.
Yes.
Not
Talks,
Dunstan.
no turmoil, no upset, no crises.
Mm.
Really good point, Donna.
But they came down like a ton of bricks on anybody that they viewed as causing turmoil.
Right.
Of course.
So, you know, and that required official action and notification and, you know, all of those things that that result in permanent records.
Going back to, you know, the question about who are these crowds, just last week, if you were, I think everyone heard this last week, when Jesus healed the two blind men, we spent almost the entire session on this one paragraph last week because there's so much in here. But remember, as they're leaving Jericho, a large crowd is following him. And so he's, you know, remember, you go up from Jericho, which is down by the Dead Sea, one of the lowest points on earth. You go up to Jerusalem. So that in and of itself, the geography is very dramatic. And we get this image of these crowds following him. And, you know, the people on the side of the road are shouting, "Have mercy on us, Son of David," which again is a messianic title. And so this is almost like the first act before Jesus arrives. So, you know, you can imagine. And who was it who said, was it John said they were, you know, drumming up all this energy as they come in to the city. Well, as we do, I wanted to share a couple of pieces of art of this moment, and just see what your thoughts are. So this first one is from Angelico. And any observations or thoughts about this one?
He's definitely riding the donkey and not the colt, because the colt is really tiny.
That was the thing on the cold. Poor thing. Anything else that you observe about this one?
Somebody's writing something.
Oh, yes, there's a pen in the back.
Mm. Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Could that be a palm frond?
That could be.
Oh,
Here.
Not the way he's holding it. Mm.
He's
Well-
holding it like a pen, but
Mm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never noticed that
Mm.
they
before.
wore very colorful clothes back then.
Yeah.
The person in pink is running.
Mm-hmm.
mhm.
The little feet.
Mm.
Yeah. And then here's another version, which I love this one. What do you notice or get out of this one that maybe Fra Angelico doesn't communicate?
Just
Because
the movement.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And those palms look almost like lashes.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes. And everyone, you can see everyone shouting, and, you know, sorry, let me see if I can get back to Fra Angelico for a second. Yeah, this one is so serene, and there's, and of course, it speaks to the time in which it was painted, of course, and the artistic conventions, but you almost get this, this tableau. It's, it's very, it's frozen in time, right? And I think we sometimes think about that moment as this set piece. But then the other one here, the energy, and yes, the palms do look like lashes, and everyone's yelling, and it's literally very muscular. I mean, look at these legs.
A lot of action. A lot of
And
action.
I've never seen a horse with ears pointed in that direction.
I know.
It's not a horse, it's a donkey.
Well,
Actually, it's a fairly good donkey, but their fashions are definitely 17th century.
Absolutely. But this one, I love this one because it made me think about the story differently. And look at the sky, and you can see the move, there's
Turbulent.
it's
the people's
turbulent.
expression are not happy.
No, right. Exactly.
They look like the same people who were choosing Barbarous,
Mhm.
Barabbas,
Barabbas, a few days later.
mm,
They're not looking like they're pleased with Jesus.
Mhm. Well, is this part of the turmoil of Jerusalem? And I think that's why this really spoke to me,
mm.
because I think in my imagination, I have this kind of sanitary image of Jesus coming into the city, even though I know intellectually it wasn't that way. But, I don't know. For me, this just brought the story to life at another level. And the energy, the movement, the turbulence, the foreboding. I just thought that was really interesting to look
Yeah,
at.
the sky that he's walking into is much darker than the sky that he's leaving
Yes,
behind him.
beautiful.
Mm, mm, mm.
Donna, were you going to say something?
No, sorry.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I'm always really interested in how artists across time depict these scenes. I couldn't find anything more contemporary that I could actually understand. So if you all find something, please share it with us. So let's move on to this next bit, which is a well-known story that comes right after that. And I think, again, the Rubens is helpful here, because I think it was you, Ellie, who said the sky that he's heading for is a lot darker than what's behind him. And so hold that image in mind, if you would, as we read this next bit of the story. Would someone like to read 12 through 17 for us?
Okay.
Thank
Then Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who were selling and buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the desks of those who sold doves. And he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers." The blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he cured them. But when the chief priests and the scribes saw the amazing things that he did, and heard the children crying out in the temple and saying, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they became angry and said to him, "Do you hear what these are saying?" Jesus said to them, "Yes, have you never read, out of the mouths of infants and nursing babies you have prepared praise for yourself?" He left them, went out of the city to Bethany, and spent the night there.
Thank you. All right. So again, this is a familiar story. If we listen to it in the context of Jesus coming into Jerusalem, and maybe with that painting in mind, what do you notice? What are you picking up on?
Well, everything, the mood turns on a dime
Hmm.
because, I mean, he was being lauded and praised and by the crowds. And as soon as he enters Jerusalem, it's turmoil in the city, and he is saying things that are upsetting the order.
Beautiful.
Can you imagine the physicality of like Jesus entering this area and turning over tables, like pushing over? I don't know, it doesn't sound loving. But
Well,
it's
it
just
carries-
interesting.
It definitely carries on the mood of the Rubens painting, that
Mm.
things are really starting to go, and his face
Mhm.
is set. He's
It's stressful, it's
And again,
there's a lot of anger floating around him.
I'm sorry, Ellie, what was that?
There's a lot of anger and
mhm.
energy.
Yes.
Absolutely. And what was I going to say? I totally lost it. Oh, well, it wasn't that
Sorry.
important. But yes, to everything you all just said, there's a lot of anger. You know, the stakes are I know what I was going to say. You could imagine going back to our exercise of picturing this on stage. Maybe you can imagine the music and the drums, right? And so, you know, all of this is ramping up at this point. So why does Jesus overturn the tables of the money changers? To Kim's point, it doesn't sound loving. This isn't Jesus meek and mild, right? The image that we have of Jesus, the good shepherd with a lamb slung over his shoulder. This is a different Jesus. Why would he overturn the tables?
Because they were making personal profits,
Hmm.
as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
They're just doing business.
Mm-hmm.
They were providing a service. You were supposed to show up with with a sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody has an unblemished lamb or a pigeon in their, on their roof. So
Well, especially if you're traveling a great distance in from the country, right?
yeah,
And if you are a peasant and you're making this pilgrimage, you're not going to be able to do that.
so these people were providing a service.
But what's the problem with the way they were providing the service?
They were
House of
making
prayer. Sorry. The temple's supposed to be a house of prayer, not a place of business.
But they
Well,
were in the profane part of the temple. They were on the temple grounds, but not in the sanctuary.
right. In
Like
the
selling donuts in the parish hall instead of during the service.
right.
But it sounds to me as though they're taking advantage of these people. It's like if you go into a city and there's some city that's hosting the Olympics, all the hotels are going to be 5 times more expensive than they were the previous year. And it sounds like they're overcharging these simple people who don't really have the money.
Beautiful.
And then they're pocketing it and, going home happy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In a similar way that, that was one of the reasons tax collectors were reviled, right? Because there would always be an upcharge. The tax collectors could put a little bit in their own pockets. So there's something maybe corrupt going on here. Go ahead, Ellie. Sorry.
Tup was just saying that this is a lot like selling indulgences. These people need something that they can sacrifice in order to reach God, as they believe, and someone's making money off of that. And that's wrong.
Definitely.
But is
Well, how else are you
Patty
going to get the
the
sacrifice?
What was that, John?
the quote, Patty, at least appears to be, it may be from Jeremiah. Is there more to that quote about the house of prayer? You're making it a den of robbers.
Let me pull up the quote. Hang on. It's Jeremiah 7. Hang on. be helpful.
Place where criminals feel safe is what
Amy
Wait,
Jo.
Amy Joel
Unless-
said, yeah.
Oh, yeah, the sanctuary.
Den of robbers is where a place where criminals feel safe.
Mhm.
Mm.
Let me just read this little bit from Jeremiah because
Mm.
it gets very.
Mhm.
The word that came to the Lord, stand in the gate of the Lord's house and proclaim there this word and say, hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah, you who enter these gates to worship the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, amend your ways and your doings, and let me dwell with you in this place. This idea of dwelling, which of course is germane to the temple. Do not trust in these deceptive words. This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. For if you truly amend your ways and your doings, if you truly act justly with one another, if you do not oppress the alien, the orphan, and the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not go after other gods to your own hurt, then I will dwell with you in this place, in the land that I gave to your ancestors forever and ever. Here you are, trusting in deceptive words to no avail. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, make offerings to Baal, and go after other gods that you've not? And then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are safe, only to go on doing all these abominations? Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your sight? I too am watching, says the Lord. So again, that, if not story, that prophecy from Jeremiah would certainly resonate with the audience, the intended audience of Matthew's gospel. So yeah. So again, this brings up this end times. We talked about the eschatological piece, the coming of the kingdom. Think about it in apocalyptic terms when we've talked about people who are being oppressed and the righteous king will come and turn everything upside down. So that anger that we're hearing from Jesus, this is going back to the Rubens painting. There's that turbulence again, right? Is that things are really coming to, oops, sorry. Anything else that you notice here?
I can't find the reference to out of the mouths of infants and nursing babies you have prepared praise for yourself.
That's from Psalms.
Psalms, okay.
That is,
Oh yes,
Psalm
Psalm 8.
8:2.
Okay, sorry.
it's okay. So anything else that strikes you? Is there any significance to verse 15 when the chief priests and the scribes saw the amazing things that Jesus did and heard the children crying out in the temple and saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, they became angry? What do you think? Why do you think Matthew mentions the children?
That's the part that I was wondering. So,
Any ideas? Anybody?
Does set up the reading from the Psalm, then which follows.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And twice before this, in recent chapters, Jesus has privileged children, hasn't he? When the first he says, unless you turn and become like a little child. We spent some time talking about that a couple weeks ago. And then after that, when the disciples try to prevent the children from coming to him, he says, let them come, for to such as these belongs the kingdom of God or kingdom of heaven. So again, it's interesting that Matthew puts the children there, whether that's literal or it's a poetic device. I can't say, but this is how the text has been received, which means, it has some authority in the history of Christianity, and this idea of even the children crying out Hosanna to the Son of David. And of course, this angers the religious authorities. Well, I wanted to share with you just some commentary by Dr. Warren Carter, who is from Oklahoma, Jackie. He teaches.
Right.
So Carter makes these 3 points about the section that we have just read, that as Jesus comes into the city, he exercises kingly authority in procuring property. So the Lord has need of the donkey and the colt. He executes an entry ritual usually reserved for elite ruling figures, and again with the cloaks and the palm branches. And then he attacks the Rome-sanctioned temple-based rulers in the the tables. So again, we can this conflict is coming to a head in these scenes. And it's been a long time coming, right? Because we're in chapter 21, and remember, Matthew's the longest gospel, and Matthew really takes his time building up to this moment. And so going back to Kim's point about this doesn't sound very loving. This is, enough is enough, right? This is where the showdown is going to take place.
I'm interested with that point, the Roman-based sanction, the Roman-sanctioned people in the temple. Yeah. He attacks the Roman-sanctioned temple-based rulers.
And as Fred was saying, Rome let the Jews do what they needed to do, right? But implicitly, this means that they were given the chief priests and the scribes and the leaders of the temple were given the go-ahead to continue these practices, which Jesus calls into question at the very least.
Romans, gave the Jews considerable latitude.
They did.
Yes.
And beyond most groups.
As long as they were peaceful.
Correct.
Well, as long as they paid their taxes and, they were kind of allowed to rule themselves, but the Jews took it to an exceptional degree. I think at one point Augustus said his statue would be placed in all the Roman and all the temples around the empire. And the Jews came, and in what I think is the first nonviolent protest, they all just sat in the courtyard so the statue couldn't be brought in. And Pilate was more than willing to slaughter them all. But somebody pointed out to him that if he did that, it would probably reflect badly when the story was told in Rome. And anyway, who would harvest all the grain? So, he decided to let it go.
Right. But the point here is what Jesus is taking on. So, yes. So
Jesus seems to show no idea that these people are caught in a box. If they give in to Jesus, the Rome will come in and bring the hammer down. And if they don't give in, they might lose their authority.
What do you all think about that Jesus has no idea? Do you agree with that? Do you question?
No.
I think he has every idea what he's doing.
Sorry.
I think he, to the extent he has an idea, I think he doesn't care or, is perfectly happy to bring the whole place down.
That sounds like Matt Gaetz. Don't do that.
Yeah, I was about to say it has a McCarthy flavor to it.
Oh dear. All right, let's read this one more paragraph before we quit for today. Because I don't want to lose the momentum, the fact that this next story, this next bit comes right after the entry and the encounter in the temple. So would somebody, so Jesus has turned the tables, he's gotten really ticked off, and he has retreated to Bethany for the night. And Bethany is outside of Jerusalem. In Luke and John, from Luke and John, we know that Mary and Martha and Lazarus live in Bethany. I don't know, Matthew doesn't tell us that he's gone to hang out with them, but maybe. But now he is coming back. Would somebody like to read this one paragraph, 18 to 22 for us?
Okay.
Thank you, Donna.
Jesus curses the fig tree. In the morning, when he returned to the city, he was hungry. And seeing a fig tree by the side of the road, he went to it and found nothing at all on it but leaves. Then he said to it, "May no fruit ever come from you again." And the fig tree withered at once. When the disciples saw it, they were amazed, saying, "How did the fig tree wither at once?" Jesus answered them, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, but only will you do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain," did I skip something? "Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only will you do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be lifted up and thrown into the sea, it will be done. Whatever you ask for in prayer with faith, you will receive."
You know. So the fig tree story is always controversial. Always, always, always. What do you think about it?
Petty.
What was that, Fred? Sorry.
It's such a petty thing to be doing. As I
I've
understand it, it wasn't even the time for the fig tree to be bearing.
So that, I mean, I have often thought of this as being another example of cranky Jesus, but I think because occasionally he does lose his temper and he's half human, but I think here he's almost making a point that faith, they're not believing enough, I think, and it's just an example of what you could do if you really believed in me, I guess. I mean, this is only a symbol and an example, but
If
it's very
faith,
practical. It really gets them where they live because figs, thing, you can't kill a fig tree. It's not a good thing. So
if
It
faith
also
and hope
harkens
were
back.
enough.
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead,
go
John.
ahead.
No, I said
I was
if
just going to
faith-
say
Go.
it harkens back to what we did a couple of chapters ago, where we were talking about mustard seeds and faith, and we get almost the same quote, that if you have the faith, the grain of a mustard seed, you can pick up the mountains and cast them. I mean, it's almost a duplication of what was done earlier.
And Ellie,
Okay.
go ahead, Donna.
It's some of the parables are strange to us, and we don't quite understand them. And I don't think it's meant to be taken literally about, whether it was fig season or not. But he demonstrates his power when he withers that tree, and it says they were amazed. And it's like, I think I can see them all stepping back, like, "Whoa, why, you really did a number on that tree." And then he tells them that they need faith to move mountains. And I think the subtext, if you don't, you're going to wither up and die.
So there's something about bearing fruit. And you commented, Donna, on the word amazed. Right. That's a word that comes up. Matthew uses amazed and astonished, are words that we translate as amazed and astonished a lot. Right. Every time Jesus does something for lack of a better word, supernatural or outside of the bounds of our common humanity, people go, whoa, yeah. And this happens repeatedly over the many chapters of Matthew. And so here we go again. And so, John, question, how does this fig tree story function in the other gospels?
Well, I can remember because we did it when we did Mark, that there's a Markian sandwich around this, that that he first goes by the fig tree and curses it, then something else happens, and then he comes back later, and the disciples see it and say, "Hey, golly, you really did wither it." At which point he then goes into this thing, and I forget what we said about that sandwich, but I do remember, and it is in the parallels.
And does Luke tell it as well?
Luke does not tell it. Luke does not have the fig tree, just Mark and Matthew.
Yeah. So there's an apocalyptic element to this. And if we think about, where, and in Mark's gospel, John, does it take place during Holy Week, during this last week, or is it earlier in Jesus's life? That's what I don't remember.
No, it takes place during Holy Week, and it's a little different. Mark says he comes to the temple, he looks around, then he goes to Bethany for the night. The next day, although Matthew had him cleansing the temple the same day, he comes back, he sees the fig tree, he curses the fig tree, then he goes to the temple, cleanses the temple. Then they come out from cleansing the temple, and the disciples see, gee, look at that fig tree. You really blasted it.
Thank you.
And
So yeah, okay, that's very helpful. So Mark does the sandwich thing that we talked about, and he flips the story up. Matthew chooses to, remember, Matthew is basing his work largely on Mark, and so he shifts it. He makes a little editorial decision to do the cleansing of the temple first, and then the fig tree. So if we interpret it the way Matthew's doing it, it seems to me that, cranky Jesus, this cursing of the fig tree, this thing about not bearing fruit, somehow is connected to or grows out of the incident of cleansing the temple. And again, we don't know exactly how it happened in real time in Jesus's actual story. So, but the fact that Matthew kind of shifts it a little bit says something about his agenda telling the story. So, and Ellie used the word symbol earlier, and I think that's important. And Donna talked about not taking it literally as well, but this is a story meant to illustrate a lesson, right? As going back to Rubens, come on. There he is. As that sky is darkening and looming, things are, the tension is building and the cross is looming and all of that. This story is just yet another example placed right here. Anything else about it before we quit? Okay, so next Wednesday we'll pick up at 23, which is the story that we just heard this past Sunday in church. Again, we couldn't have possibly choreographed this if we had tried, that we would wind up in Matthew 21 in the lectionary and in Bible study. So it's great because it's keeping it fresh for us. So we'll pick up there next time. And Ellie and Bob will be back on this side of the pond next week. So there won't be a where in the world. We'll say
They're in Bethesda.
Yeah, maybe.
Bethesda.
Brownsville, Maryland, if I remember.
Brownsville, yeah.
No, not Wednesday. They're not open.
all right, beloveds. Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Thanks, Patty.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Patty.
Patty.
Bye.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.